Hello and welcome to this week's Dream Deals, the show that has more cash per square foot than Bill Gates' petty cash box. Now on tonight's show we're looking at a car manufacturer that over the years has probably produced fewer cars than Sir Clive Sinclair ever did, but it's still regarded as one of the most respected and glamorous in the motor car industry. Now rather than me just telling you who we're talking about, let's play a little game of can you tell who it is yet? Throughout their lifetime, they've had numerous different owners, the latest of which is the second largest car manufacturer in the world. They are the manufacturers of some of the most famous, distinctive and bespoke sports cars in the world. Still not got it? A mark made famous by Bond, James Bond? It's Aston Martin. Aston were formed in 1914 by Lionel Martin and Robert Bamford, who were based in some small premises in West London. One car that epitomised Aston at this time is this 1933 Standard. Originally built as a four-door saloon, it's been significantly altered over the years. As you can see, it's now a two-door convertible. Designed as a 30s tourer with a 1500cc single overhead camshaft engine and no synchromesh on the gearbox. And it's got no poke. You have to be over 60 to drive it and wear a tweed jacket. It's not, I'm not, so I won't. Now, even though the company had been formed, they were still without a name, but this was about to be resolved. In 1914, using an Isotta Fraschini chassis and a 1400cc Coventry Simplex engine, Lionel Martin entered and won the Aston Clinton Hill Climb, and, putting the two together, Aston Martin was born. After the First World War, Bamford and Martin continued to race and put their triumphant simplex-engined race car into production. It was to become the first of many successful Aston Martins. In fact, so successful that shortly after that, Robert Bamford decided he could rest on his laurels, quite literally, retire, and then sole ownership fell to Lionel Martin. Now, the 20s, 30s and 40s, whilst successful in many respects, were turbulent too. And in 1947, the company was bought by the godfather of all modern Aston Martins, David Brown. Now, those of you that are listening and not just waiting for Joe Guest to come on may have realised the significance of David Brown. And that's because from that moment on, all modern Aston Martins were named after him, DB, the DBs. Launched in 1963, the DB5 was a development of the hugely successful DB4, available both as a sports saloon and a convertible. It was slightly heavier and slightly longer than its predecessor, but those problems were offset by an increase in engine power. Under the bonnet was a 4-litre engine generating 282 brake horsepower. There was an option of a high-performance Vanquish model with 325 brake, which could hit 60 in 6.5 seconds. Not bad for a car that weighed nearly 1.5 tonnes. Early cars came with either a 4 or 5-speed gearbox, although there was the option of a 3-speed automatic. Other improvements over the DB4 included an improved exhaust system, an alternator rather than a dynamo, and electric windows as standard. Now, production of the DB5 ran for over 2 years, with well over 1,000 cars being made. Now, I know what you're thinking. I've not made one single reference to a certain James Bond. That's because the car's bigger than that. It's tired. It's a cliche. So moving on. If you've been shaken and stirred into wanting your very own Aston Martini, here's our very own odd job, Ian Casino Royal, with a buyer's guide.
The DB5 has quite obvious appeal, and if you're lucky enough to be able to afford one, this is how much you should expect to pay. We've seen a 1964 model sourced from America with 32,000 miles on the clock for a measly £140,000. And should you have any more cash burning a hole in your pocket, you could get a 1965 model with 11,000 miles for just under £80,000.
Not that I use it every day, but I suppose petrol costs a lot of money. It does 17 miles to the gallon, which isn't very good. It doesn't go wrong or anything like that, normally speaking, but when you do have to repair things, it's usually quite expensive.
Now, if you haven't already been put off by the buying costs, then obviously you won't be too concerned about parts. But if you do end up at the wrong end of a bollard, what's it going to cost you to get it fixed? Well, a new door skin will cost the good part of £130, while an inner wheel arch will set you back £75.
In 1965, Aston unveiled the DB6. Visually very similar to the DB5, it in fact shared the same running gear, and although slightly heavier again, performance did improve, this time mainly due to the car's aerodynamics. During its 5-year run, the DB6 was available as both a sports saloon and, from 1966, a convertible. Incidentally, the drop top featured the first electronically operated roof fitted to a European car. Performance for the DB6 Vantage was a 150 mile/hour top speed and a 0 to 60 in 6.4 seconds. The only downside was a shocking 13 miles to the gallon. As an interesting aside, worthy of note to some at least, the DB6 was available also, surprisingly, as an estate car, although rather unsurprisingly, this wasn't a standard factory fit option. In 1969, the Mark II DB6 was introduced. It had wider flared wheel arches, allowing for wider tyres, and also the first standard fitting of power steering. In 1970, the DB6 came to an end, and it would be more than 20 years before its numerical successor would be introduced.
If you are planning on buying a used DB6, you'll either have to spend your inheritance or just have a huge pot of cash under the bed. For example, a 1970 Mark II Volante with a stratospheric 91,000 miles on the clock will cost you an unbelievable £85,000. A little more acceptable is a 1968 Saloon at £48,000, although it's hardly cheap, is it?
It's not troublesome to run if you keep on top of things. Tuning the car is not too much of a problem. It's got SU carbs. Parts are not too difficult to come by. Some can be very expensive, and others are not too bad. You can usually source other parts.
Now, if you're buying a car of this age, sooner or later something is bound to go wrong. The question is, how much is it going to cost to get you back on the road? Well, for a start, a chromed offside front bumper will set you back a cool £400, while a new reversing light is slightly more reasonable at £55.
While the 1960s were dominated by the beautiful DB series and their 6-cylinder refinery, the 1970s and 80s saw the development of an altogether different beast, one that would require its own oil refinery. This 1973 V8 has been heavily modified, but it's still a great example of how much car you could buy for the same price as an average modern car. But here to give us a few more tips on getting your hands on some classic British muscle, it's Ian Royal.
To some, the V8 isn't exactly the most beautiful Aston of all time. Its chunky looks hardly make you go weak at the knees. But thanks to its somewhat dubious disability, second-hand prices are pretty reasonable. Well, for an Aston Martin anyway. We've seen a 1984 V8 Vantage with 31,000 miles on the clock for £45,000 and a 1986 V8 Zagato for £75,000.
The parts can be very expensive. But if it's maintained and serviced regularly and the oil's changed every 3,000 miles, they're pretty reliable. But like any old car, you know, the car's 25 years old, you will have things go wrong.
Now, just because the V8s are a little bit cheaper to buy, don't go expecting the parts to be the same. For a start, a replacement front end will cost you the best part of £670, while a rear lamp is £120. A little more reasonable, although how many times you would actually need to replace them is anyone's guess, are washer jets, a mere snip at £8.
Well, that's it for part one, but join us in part two when we'll be taking a look at a couple of the most exciting Aston Martins ever. Firstly, I'll be seeing if I'm man enough to get behind the wheel of a £160,000 Vanquish. And secondly, we'll be looking into the future with Aston Martin's exciting new AM V8 Vantage. We'll see you in a couple of minutes. In the meantime, I found a reject Vanquish seat. Let's see if I can get that in the back of the Astra. Hello and welcome back to part two of Dream Deals. Tonight we've been spending some time with the automotive legend that is Aston Martin. And coming up, we're going to be taking a sneak peek at the exciting new AM V8 Vantage. And more importantly, for me at least, I'm going to be getting behind the wheel of the V12 Vanquish. But first, let's pick up our history of Aston Martin with the DB7.
In 1993 at the Geneva Motor Show, Aston Martin unveiled the car that was going to take the company out of the doldrums and back into the heart of motoring enthusiasts everywhere. The DB7 went back to Aston's roots, embodying the spirit of the classic DBs. If you look along its smooth, elegant lines, there is the traditional DB grille, headlamp cover shapes and discreet side vents. But despite drawing on its heritage, the DB7 undertook many of the attributes associated with modern supercars. Initially, the car was powered by a 3.2-litre supercharged 6-cylinder unit. However, this was replaced by the company's first production V12, a very potent unit with 420 brake horsepower. And if you're interested, and I always am, the DB7 is capable of hitting 60 in just under 5 seconds and has a top speed of over 180 miles per hour. Inside, the first thing that grabs you is the car's sense of occasion. It truly is beautiful. That is, of course, until you take a closer look. Unfortunately, since becoming part of the Ford family, cuts have been made to make Aston an affordable proposition, which basically means is that you'll be sharing some of the minor switchgear with drivers of the humble Fiesta and Mondeo. Not quite what you'd expect from a £100,000 exclusive sports car. Being a grown man, there aren't many things that I'm really scared of, or at least not many I'd admit to in public. But a couple of things that do scare me, and Widdicombe. Ugh, that chest. Then there's flying. You see what I mean? It's not natural. Then there's Aston Martin's new Vanquish. Very scary. Now that last one might sound a little bit odd, but let me explain. 6 litres, V12, 460 brake horsepower and £160,000. Enough to fill anybody with dread. This is Aston Martin's new flagship, the Vanquish. And it's mean, it's rudely powerful, it's disgustingly expensive, and it's scary. I feel like it's looking at me, just daring me to come and have a go if I think I'm hard enough. Which I don't. But if I was, though, I would have 6 litres of V12 power to play with, delivering tarmac-peeling performance, 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds, and so on if you're brave enough to 190 miles per hour. Certainly figures to get the bravest of motorists cowering behind their beaded seat cushions. Now, the name Vanquish means to gain mastery of, to reduce to submission, to overcome in battle. All of which I'd have to do with my bank manager if I'm going to get my hands on one, because cars like this, they're not for mere mortals like me. In fact, knock 100 grand off that price and I still think that's a little too much to pay for a motor car. But if you have got 160 grand for this car, what do you get for your money? Well, the more you look at it, for a frightening supercar, it actually seems like cracking value for money. You see, for starters, there are the body panels. There are no mass-produced, computer-fitted panels here. Each one of these aluminium panels on the Vanquish has been hand-finished. That's finished by hand. There's a craftsman in a brown overall slid his hand over every single part of it and said, a tweak here, a tweak there. That's value for money. Then there are the wheels, 19 inches of forged aluminium shod in high-performance rubber. They might be 5 grand a set, the price of an average bathroom suite, but hey, they're a work of art. Speaking of works of art, next time you're thinking of popping down to the auction and spending £1 million in a Van Gogh, forget it. Get yourself a Vanquish, get yourself a picture frame, and voila, a work of art. Now, whilst we're furnishing the home, thinking of getting yourself a hi-fi? Don't bother, because with this, you get all the sounds you'll ever need. Listen to this. I call this track 1. It's called idling. Track 2. Mid-range, I like that. This is my favourite. That's called full out. Well, listen, I think that's it. Thanks very much for joining us on our review of the Vanquish on Dream Deals. We'll see you next time. Yeah, no, it went all right. Everyone happy, yeah?
I reckon, yeah,
got
it's good.
Got it covered. Sorry, excuse me. Hello? No, we've got it nailed. The guys are happy. Yeah?
What, even with my reputation? Right, yeah, no, you're the boss. Right, lads, that's not a wrap. I've got to drive it. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. Wish me luck. The temptation is that as you reach high revs, to ease off the gas a little bit to help it change gear as if it was an automatic. But in this, you really don't need to do that. Keep your foot right down and do the paddle shift, and the gearbox will find the gear for you straight away. The other temptation is that because you've got this paddle shift, you start thinking you're in an F1 car, and going into a corner you think, right, I'll change down a couple of gears. But if you get the wrong one, because you haven't got the engine speed to gauge, well, if you're in the wrong gear, the back end will start twitching, and before you know it, you're pirouetting like a Russian ballerina and you're off ski. The driver aids are many and complex and a little slow to react, which is actually quite a bit of fun. Turn the traction control off and you'll have a whole lot more fun. I've got the car's back end out a couple of times, and there is a split second with the traction control on until it starts to correct or control the power. And it is very easy to put right. One slight steering correction and the car is behaving itself like a Tory MP with an orange in its mouth. Rear visibility is not good. The brake light that's in the rear window obscures quite a lot. And as for the back view of its Lin stereo woofers, tweeters, amps and God knows what, well, that's the stereo. I'm not sure if all that's needed, because if you put your foot down and listen to the symphonic growl that is the engine, who needs music? The one major problem for me with this Vanquish is the price. I know we've gone on about it quite a lot, but 160 grand. I did some fantasy car playing at home, and I thought for £160,000 I could probably have a Ferrari 360, a BMW X5, and probably some kind of Evo thrown in. And with that, you've got all bases covered and probably a little bit of money left over to pay for all the insurance you'd need. And that's the problem. You could have all of those cars, or you could have this one supercar. The Vanquish is a great example of facing down your fears and finding them not that scary. But you're still going to need proverbials made of brass to drive a car worth 160 grand anywhere near its limits. As for any reference to a certain Secret Service agent, well, I've got a licence to drive. I still smell of this morning's baby sick. And as for a Bond girl, well, I'm off home to sleep with Hallie. Halitosis. Just when you thought Aston Martins couldn't look any better, along comes a car like this. Unveiled at this year's Detroit Motor Show, this is the future of the Aston Martin, the all-new AM V8 Vantage. Designed by Aston Martin's in-house design team, the stunning AM V8 Vantage draws upon the recent success of the DB7 and Vanquish, especially around the front grille. But where the V8 differs is in its chassis. It will be the first car in the Aston family to use the new aluminium VH platform. Basically, VH stands for vertical and horizontal, the ways in which a base platform can be adjusted to fit a new car design, the aim being, of course, to reduce future development and production costs. Underneath the beautifully sculptured bonnet is the car's hugely impressive engine. Figures from Aston Martin suggest that not only will the V8 have enough power to embarrass 911 owners, but also enough to get Vanquish drivers a little hot under their collars. The 4.3 litre supercharged V8 engine will generate around 450 brake horsepower, which will be enough to get the car to 60 in around 4.5 seconds and onto a top speed of 170 miles per hour. The V8 will be the first Aston to be built away from their traditional home of Newport Pagnell. Production will begin in 2004 at a state-of-the-art factory at Gaydon, but unfortunately a greater desire for sales will mean an end to the traditional hand-built process. But don't let this minor detail put you off, because inside the V8 still has a great sense of occasion. The Alcantara covered dash is complemented by modern brushed aluminium, chrome-edged instruments, deep pile carpets and an Art Deco style clock. Costing close to £75,000, the V8 will be the most affordable Aston ever. Production is expected to be around 2,000 cars a year, doubling Aston's current output. But just when you thought things couldn't get any more exciting, there are plans for an AM V8 cabriolet. Nice. Now, since Ford took over the reins at Aston Martin, the company have been enjoying much needed investment, and with cars like the DB7, Vanquish and the new AM V8, they've been recapturing the hearts and pockets of millionaires everywhere. And at last, Britain, albeit with US dollars, have got a car manufacturer that can take on the likes of Ferrari and Porsche. Now, that's all we've got time for this week, sadly, but join us at the same time next week on Dream Deals, when we'll be talking all things American in our US special. We'll see you then.